Alright, I am back with another build, and this was another build request. I was asked to make an Arcane Archer build. It kind of went into the back of my mind initially, because I was just like, that's probably something pretty simple. But then I actually got into trying to make what I would consider an Arcane Archer, and it became much more difficult than I anticipated. So, when I say Arcane Archer, what am I talking about? An Arcane Archer, at least to me, I kind of looked at the official class from D&D 5e, but also like just kind of my interpretation of what I would like an Arcane Archer to be. And from what I understand and what I kind of feel would be right is a caster, I guess, who would channel their spells or their, magical attacks through their bow and arrow. And this is not easy to build in this game. I am just going to go into this with, I guess, a mild disclaimer. If you are trying to make a build that focuses solely on using a bow, you are basically just nerfing yourself pretty heavily. I think I've got, technically I've got two builds here, or build concepts or whatever we're calling them now, where you can kind of achieve the Arcane Archer who uses magic and a bow through their bow. You can kind of achieve it in two different ways with two different builds. So I've kind of focused on the build that I think is overall more powerful and more fun to play, but I'm not going to say it's overall the best option, because there's definitely parts of the other build that make that one worth using. But anyways, let's get into the build. So to start off at level 1, you are going to be a fighter. This is true across both builds because we quite simply want the archery fighting style as early as we can get it, and the other classes that we will be taking do not get the archery fighting style. Because spoilers, we're not going ranger. Ranger didn't really do what I wanted to in this build without going really far into it. It wasn't really my style. So I've decided to go with a fighter level 1 dip and go into other classes afterwards. So you definitely, like I said, want to take the archery fighting style. This is going to give you a +2 bonus to range weapon attacks. We're going to be using this to offset the Sharpshooter feat that we're going to be getting later, because you can't have a ranged build without Sharpshooter. So, let's go on to the ability scores. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit differently than I normally do. Usually I will show the stats of a build that has like endgame gear, like the Amulet of Health, the Gloves of Hill Giant Strength, the Gloves of Dexterity, all that sort of thing. I'm not doing that here. From now on, I think I'm just going to outright ban myself from using those kinds of items unless I believe they are absolutely, unless I believe you can use them really well in the build and there's something you can get, relatively easily. And for those of you that don't actually know, you can get both the Gauntlets of Hill Giant Strength and the Amulet of Great Health without having to fight a single enemy in Act 3, but I'm not going to say anything else more on that at this time. So, as far as your ability scores are concerned, it's a really straightforward build. You want to go for your Dexterity to be absolutely maxed out to 17. Your Constitution, I would say put this at around 14. Now, depending on which build you go with, like I say, I'm going to be showing both, you would either want to put your Wisdom to 16 or your Charisma. For this example, we're going to be going Charisma. For the later example, you're going to want to go Wisdom. I would actually put your Constitution to 15 here. Sorry, I forgot we had extra points. This is kind of what you want your starting thing to look like. Yes, you've got lower soft stats, but I feel like the best way to kind of maximize the potential of this build is to kind of go min-max a little bit, which seems to be the general consensus, so we're going to go with that here. This is what your starting stats are going to look like. As for your skill proficiencies, take you whatever you like. I'm just going to be moving on from this quite quickly. So, before we get into the main crux of this build that I'm working on here, I want to actually go over the other option I've come up with, and I'm going to go over here for that. This is an interesting build. I'm not going to go into this in full detail, but we are a level 1 fighter, level 8 cleric here. Obviously, before you get to level 8, you would basically just play this as a standard cleric with, a level 1 dip into fighter just to get the archery fighting style. But why have I gone cleric here? So the big thing about cleric is there are a lot of skills with cleric that imbue your weapons that aren't specific to melee. For example, Divine Favor gives you 1 to 4 radiant damage. magic weapon, gives it a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls. What else do we have here? There was a couple more. There's a few others, but the main one is Divine Strike. Now, depending on which type of cleric you go with, when you reach level 8 as a cleric, you get a kind of a weird version of Divine Smite, but for clerics. Basically, what it does is it imbues your weapon with an extra d8 of a damage type based on your cleric subclass. In this case, the War Cleric gains an additional slashing damage bonus, whereas if you're a Tempest Cleric, you get Thunder. If you're a Nature Cleric, you actually get to choose between Fire, Ice, and Lightning, which I think is actually kind of sick. And then, obviously, Light, I believe there's Radiant and such like that. So, this would be the way you would kind of be able to imbue your arrows with magic damage consistently in a way that's, that actually works. Because the cool thing about Divine Strike is, yes, you can use it as a regular melee attack roll thing, and you get it once per turn. It does not cost a resource, but also, when you land an attack, you can choose to apply the damage after hitting the roll. So you don't have to commit yourself to a Divine Strike as your main attack. You can see if the attack lands first, and then you get to use Divine Strike, which is really, really cool. And I think with the ability to use various support spells that Cleric gets, like Guardian of Faith, Spirit Guardians, Spiritual Weapon, Guidance, Bless, the healing spells, you can play a really, really unique support character. Now, obviously, by going War Priest Cleric, you get these things called War Priest Charges, which allows you to use your bonus action for an extra attack up to, at this level, 5 times per long rest. This is why I think this is a more support-oriented thing. You are a support archer, which has the ability to deal some pretty decent damage with their attacks. Unfortunately, when I actually played this build, and I test these builds without teammates to make sure that they can stand on their own, I didn't enjoy playing it. I do think as a support build, and I actually think this could be a good build for perhaps Shadowheart or something, if you wanted to stick with a cleric route for her, I do not think this is really a fun build to play on its own. You are going to feel underpowered to the rest of your more optimized teammates. While yes, you can provide a lot of support, it's not really my personal cup of tea, and I don't know how people would think about it for a character that they are making the main character of their story. So while I'm not going to say this is a bad build, and obviously past level 8 Cleric you can do whatever you like, you can take some levels of a full spellcaster, you can push Cleric all the way to 11, you can take some more fighter levels if you want something maybe like Battle Master. There's a lot of room to play around with this here, but this build is not the focus here. The focus is back to our main character, and I'll get to this in a minute. So let's continue leveling up as we go. And I'm going to do things again a little bit differently this time. Again, I'm going to be stopping to look at equipment at levels 4, 8, and 12. Because I, this time, have decided to show equipment that you can get in Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, so that you can have equipment that works as you progress through the game. So, and I believe that dividing the level structure into 3, so being 4, 8, and 12, is kind of accurate to your natural level progression as you go through the game anyway. Obviously, there's room to be a little bit behind or a little bit ahead, but the build should still work either way. So we're going to be stopping every 4 levels to have a look at the equipment that I'll be suggesting. So, alright, so at fighter level 2, we are not taking it. I will say though, you can take it if you want, but I want to jump straight into the main class that is going to make this build work. And as I was saying earlier, before I cut myself off, you need to trust me on this. You need to trust me on this, okay? I know this is an Archer build, but we're going Paladin. Hear me out. Don't click off the video, because trust me, this does work in a weird way. So the big thing about Paladin, obviously, is that your Divine Smites, which is the main thing you get from Paladin, do not work with ranged weapons. That is true. However, there is something that we're going to be getting with this build that we can't really get any other way, at least not in a meaningful capacity. That will be a huge buff to our ranged bow attacks, and you get it pretty early on in comparison to, say, something like the stuff you get from later levels of Ranger, or even the 8 levels of Cleric that we went into earlier. So, we're going Paladin here, and I promise you'll see why. Let's start with our subclass. We have 3 options here. It is a pick your favorite situation. I'm going to be going with Oath of Vengeance here, mainly because I like the convenience of it. It is the hardest oath to break naturally through gameplay. These other ones can break really quite easily, and it becomes quite annoying. But we also get Inquisitor's Might here, which is going to buff you or an ally's weapon attacks to deal an additional 3 radiant damage. I believe that's radiant damage equal to your Charisma modifier, correct me if I'm wrong. And it can daze enemies for 1 turn. So for a cost of your Channel Oath, you can basically just buff your bow up to deal a little bit of extra damage, and then also inflict the daze condition on enemies, which, if you don't know, they have disadvantage on wisdom saving throws and can't take reactions, and they lose the dexterity bonus of their armor class. It's situational, but it is cool, and I think it does work out. So definitely going to be taking Vengeance here. Next up at Paladin level 2, we are getting the main feature of Paladin that we are not going to be using, and trust me, that hurts. But we do get another fighting style here. Unfortunately, you don't get archery, like I said before. And you also get your fighting style at level 2 as opposed to level 1, and we want it as quickly as we can get it, so I still think starting with Fighter is the better way to go, even if you're going Paladin. You have options here. If you plan to have a sidearm, like a kind of maybe like a short sword or something that you can wield in one hand, I think dueling is quite good. If you want to wield a great sword as a sidearm, you can definitely go with great weapon fighting. If you want to go with shield, protection can also work. I'm just going to be taking defense because it is since I'm trying to just stay to only using a bow, so defense is the only fighting style you're really going to get anything out of with that limitation. But if you actually want to play this optimally, you're going to want to take one of these, probably great weapon fighting and going with a great sword. But for the sake of giving myself the limitation of only using a bow, we're taking defense. I've got a racial bonus here. I mean, we're going to see why I've gone Zariel Tiefling in a minute, but we'll keep going for now. As for prepared spells, now, as I said, unfortunately, as well as Divine Smite, none of the Smite spells that we get at this level work. Searing Smite requires a melee weapon. Thunderous Smite requires a melee weapon. But Thunderous Smite just has given me an idea for a build. I'll come back to that later. And Wrathful Smite requires a melee weapon. This sucks, and I kind of wish that both D&D and Larian for Baldur's Gate 3 changed this into making these smite spells work with A, ranged attacks, and B, unarmed strikes. Could you imagine using these on a monk? They would be so fun. I digress. Basically, you can just take support spells here. Shield of Faith is a good buff to your AC at the early levels. Command can be used for all sorts of shenanigans, including getting a legendary weapon at, Act 1, so, Compel Duel is really fun if you're playing a ranger, because if you compel someone to come towards you and they only have melee attacks, they basically have to spend all their turns dashing towards you, and you can play Keep Away, basically stun-locking them in a really weird way. Worth picking up on a ranger, actually. On a ranged build, I should say. Definitely an interesting little piece of kit. Bless, always good. You can take... And here we're also going to be taking Divine Favor. This is the closest thing to the Smite spells that is going to work with us. Any weapon gets an additional d4 of radiant damage. Yes, it costs concentration, but it only costs a bonus action. So, in the early levels, it can be okay. Might as well take it. And at level 4, we are going to be a Paladin 4. Simple as. You're going to get some... Well, no, you're going to be a Paladin 3. God, I'm all over the place this video. You have to forgive me. We're going to get Divine Health. Means we don't get diseased. Nice. We get some more spell slots. We're going to get Vow of Enmity and Abjure Enemy. Abjure Enemy, like I say, is cool. It lets you frighten an enemy. But Vow of Enmity, I use this in the Virgil build, and this thing is awesome. Basically, pick an enemy, most likely a boss, and gain advantage on all attack rolls against them for 10 turns without concentration. One of the best things you can get as a Paladin, I think. Definitely cool. We're also going to get Hunter's Mark and Bane, but Hunter's Mark is really nice thematically, especially since we're not taking Ranger. Basically, being able to use Hunter's Mark as if you were a Ranger still is cool, so we're still getting a little bit of that Ranger flavouring here. Unfortunately, it's only 1 per long rest, but again, you can kind of use this as a boss beater build, where you are just unloading into single enemies. You can prepare an additional spell at this level. Unfortunately, there's still not many that are very useful, so I would just take Cure Wounds, because there's nothing wrong with a little bit of healing. And with that, we are at total level 4, so let me show you the Act 1 equipment I have prepared. So, This is the equipment I would say is good to get in Act 1 that you can use. Let's start off with the main ticket item here, the bow. We're using the bow of the Banshee. It is a short bow for +1 weapon enhancement. You can get this as early as entering the Underdark, and you can pick it up from a vendor down there. Blood Curdling Emission. On a hit, possibly inflict Frightened, a powerful status effect. Gain a 1d4 bonus to attack and damage against frightened creatures. So this is actually, for an Act 1 option at low levels, this is actually a surprisingly powerful option for characters that would be, would be using ranged attacks. It inflicts a really cool status condition and gives you extra damage to enemies with that status condition. I think that's a very, very cool baseline to get you started in this build. Next up we have the Holy Lance Helm. This gives you a nice little buff. It gives you a buff to Constitution saving throws, and it gives you Smite the Graceless. Creatures who miss their attack rolls against the wearer must make a Dexterity saving throw or take 1d4 radiant damage. If you couldn't tell by the title of this video and the overall buffs we're getting, I'm trying to pile on a lot of radiant damage, because the idea of an Arcane Archer who imbues their arrows with Holy Wrath is really, really cool. So I'm kind of leaning into radiant damage with this build. Next up is the Luminous Armor. When the wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a Radiant Shockwave, which is a unique condition to this, I believe, which basically inflicts a Radiating Orb in a 3-meter radius. And if we don't know what Radiating Orb is, there's a lot of windows open right now. The affected enemy has a -1 to attack rolls per remaining turn. So it's just a nice debuff that you're essentially getting for free on a decent piece of armor for this level. It can be found really, really easy. I don't remember the exact location, but it's quite easy to get in Act 1, so it's definitely worth trying to pick this up. It just fits in with the build nicely. Next up, the Gloves of Archery. You gain proficiency on longbows and shortbows. We already have this, but in addition, your ranged weapon attacks deal an additional 2 damage. Can't go wrong with more damage. No reason not to have this. They're really, really easy to get. And I think this will do pretty well for the most part. I mean, you can easily replace it with pretty much any other gloves as soon as you get something you feel like is stronger for your build, but I feel like this is a good baseline to start with. And lastly is Disintegrating Night Walkers. You can get these in Act 1, so I'm counting them. Yes, they're hidden behind a boss fight, but you can technically entirely skip that boss fight if you know what you're doing. But anyways, you cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice, and you also gain Misty Step once per short rest. Super, super cool boots. I actually have these set as our footwear for the rest of the game, just because that use of Misty Step is really, really good. But speaking of Misty Step, the Amulet of Misty Step can be obtained early in level 1, Act 1, I should say. And it, like the boots, gives you Misty Step once per short rest. So even though we're not getting Misty Step as a natural spell in our kit, having it twice per short rest is really, really good. So I feel like this little combination is a good way of getting you started, because again, as a ranged user, you want to be able to maneuver around the battlefield and get out of melee range of enemies, and Misty Step is a great way to do that. Obviously, replace this whenever you get the chance. I also don't have any rings or amulets that replace this later on, because there aren't really any that specifically benefit this build, so I think this is going to be a use your better judgment situation. Pick your favorite, go with what you like. Alright, let's get back to the leveling. Alright. At total level 5, we're going to continue down the Paladin route. And because we are total level 5, we are going to get Branding Smite as our racial ability. I'll get more on that later. But here, you can just take another spell. It doesn't really matter what you take. I mean, the game's already picked Heroism, so we'll just go with that to give you 5 temporary hit points. I mean, it's filling up a spell slot. Wait, it took away my... No. What? Okay, it's messed up my spells. Yeah, go with that. And we also get our first feat at total level 5, and obviously, as I've already said, we're taking Sharpshooter. This is an extremely powerful feat that every ranged build should be taking. The only time I didn't take this was on my Dante build, where I instead did Crossbow Expert, because the idea was to use crossbows in close proximity. But I actually think, looking back on it, I would take Sharpshooter in that build instead, because a +10 to damage is really, really good. Guaranteed on every ranged attack. However, you have the -5 penalty to hit. The equipment I'm providing is going to overcome this -5 penalty to the best of my ability. So, we'll get into that when we reach our next milestone. Next up, we are a Paladin 5, and we're getting basically everything we came into Paladin for. We are going to be getting extra attack here, which is going to mean 2 bow attacks per turn. Nice. Some decent spell slots, and also Branding Smite as something we can use more than once per long rest, because obviously as a racial feature, you only get it once per long rest. So here's the thing with Branding Smite. Yes, it is basically a worse version of Divine Smite. The only benefit it really gets is being able to prevent enemies from turning invisible. It requires your concentration, which of course sucks. And enemies get to make a constitution save against it. And it only deals 2d6 radiant damage. However, it can be used on ranged attacks. This is how we're going to be, and it upscales with spell slots. So this is going to be how you're going to be getting a big chunk of damage on your ranged attacks. And it's going to, so basically this is our only way of getting ranged Divine Smites, and that kind of sucks. But having this build really come online at total level 6 is but I think you'll find that Branding Smite plus Sharpshooter plus extra attack plus with the equipment I'm going to be showing off later, you are going to be getting a decent chunk of damage out of this build. And I believe this also comes with the caveat that if your attack misses, it doesn't actually like take up your concentration or your spell slot, but don't quote me on that. The wiki said this, but I haven't had a chance to really test this yet. Magic weapon as well. This can buff your bow. It's okay. No, it's not. It's shit. It just use a +1 weapon. It does, but unlike D&D 5e, this does stack with weapons that already have enchantments. So technically, a +1 weapon or even a +2 weapon gets an additional point to its attack and damage rolls. But your concentration is better spent on Branding Smite. As an O spell, you're also going to be getting Misty Step. Pretty dang cool. Also Hold Person, which I like here because there's something very thematic about an archer just saying, stand still, and then being able to shoot you wherever they like. Perfect targeting. I quite like that thematically. So I would definitely say you're going to want to be bringing those to the table. They're always prepared. And I think here we're going to be replacing Heroism and... what else? Never mind. With Branding Smite and Magic Weapon. I mean, Aid is also a pretty good spell here if you don't have a Cleric that's already using it. In fact, I might place that over Divine Favor, since we're never going to be using that anymore now that we have Branding Smite. Yeah. So here's the thing. Now that we have our main bit of our kit, which is Branding Smite, is there a reason to stay in Paladin anymore, especially since we get extra attack at the same level? And in my personal opinion, the answer is no. The only other thing we could technically get if we went all the way into Paladin up to level 9 would be Elemental Weapon, which is a slightly better version of Magic Weapon, which would allow you to imbue your bow attacks with any element. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think you get a lot from Paladin as a ranged weapon attacker. So what I want to do is actually buff up our Branding Smite as high as we can go. So we're going to be multiclassing into a full caster. This is a pick your favourite situation. You're most likely going to want to pick between Bard or Sorcerer. Sorcerer is good if you want meta magic and just a more widely available range of spells. But then at that point, I feel like you're playing a Sorelock that is just weaker, because Sorelocks are one of the most powerful builds you can make in this game. Paladin 6, Sorcerer 6 is insanely strong because you just get the maximum level of spell slots and you just go absolutely crazy. So if you're sitting on a Sorelock that's just using a bow and you're just looking at your Divine Smite saying, I can't use that, and that sucks. So I actually think we want to go the more utility spell route here and play sort of a semi-frontline, well, not frontline, but a semi-ranged attacker, semi-support build. So I'm going to say we're going to go with Bard. I always use Bard for a lot of my builds, and it's because it's so good. It does everything. With this, we're going to get 2 cantrips. Obviously, Vicious Mockery and Friends are always my go-to. They are basically my 2 favorite cantrips in the game. As for your spells, I honestly suggest just going for the full support kit, like I did with my Dante build and plenty other builds. Longstrider, Speak of Animals, Disguise Kit, Disguise Kit, I guess, and Featherfall, just all the good utility spells. However, if you're not too keen on perhaps Disguise Self, maybe for example, you could actually pick Fairy Fire, giving all your attack rolls against targets within that kind of area. You get advantage against them. This obviously does break as soon as you try to cast, you know, your Branding Smite. But if you're not going for that, this could actually be a great way to counteract Sharpshooter. I really cannot speak today. I'm gonna go with a drum for the starting instrument, because when am I ever going to do that? You also get a free skill proficiency. Take whatever you like. I'll just keep Deception. Nice ability. Moving on. Next up, we're at Bard level 2, which means we're going to be getting Jack of all trades, so we're getting proficiency on everything, well, half proficiency, and we're also getting Song of Rest, which means we're going to get a third short rest per long rest, which means, for example, like if you're still using our Misty Step items, you're going to get 3 uses of that per long rest now. Pretty good, just a general nice buff to have. And we get an extra spell here. Take whatever you like. We already have Cure Wounds from Paladin, so I can see taking Healing Word here as a pretty nice option. And at level 8, we're now going to go into the Act 2 equipment. So let's take a look. We're going to be changing our bow at this state to the Darkfire short bow. I've used this a bunch of times. It's just basically like a free way to get haste. But here, it actually works really nicely as a main weapon. Yes, it's a free way to get haste. Also, it grants resistance to fire and cold damage, and it's a +2 enchanted weapon. And it's really easy to get in Act 2. You buy it from a vendor from one of the main kind of hubs in that area, so it's absolutely worth picking up. I'm going to slot that in here to see that we get haste and a big buff to our damage. Next up, you are going to want to swap out your Holy Lance Helm for the Marksmanship Hat. Gives you a +1 bonus to ranged attack rolls. I don't know why that just says regular attack roll. It is lying, and thrown attack rolls. This is just an extra point towards our attack rolls to counteract the effects of Sharpshooter. Also, it's stylish as hell, basically kind of going for almost like a cowboy vibe. Remind me to do like a cowboy build. I've always wanted to do something like that. Maybe like a Beastmaster Ranger with dual crossbows. I'm getting ahead of myself. Next up, you're going to be using the Dwarven Split Mail as your armor. Again, it's really easy to get, and it's just a straight upgrade. You take 1 less piercing damage. Cool, because we're going to be playing at range, you're going to be taking piercing damage much more often from bows and crossbows. Body Age, you're getting a +1 bonus to strength saving throws and checks. A nice buff. Unfortunately, we do take a disadvantage on stealth checks, but it also gives you a +2 to your constitution, which I think is just a really nice overall buff. We're also going to be able to get the Cloak of Protection at this point in the game. It's just always my go-to cloak if I'm not really sure what to put on a build, because it's just a straight-up buff to our AC and our saving throws, giving us a nice total 21 AC at this point. And again, most of this equipment can be obtained pretty much right as you get into the bulk of Act 2, so yeah, basically as soon as you enter the Shadowlands. Again, no change to the gloves here, because I didn't really find anything that specifically fit on this build, so just use your best judgment, and like I say, I think keeping the boots here is pretty good unless you find something that you prefer. But yeah, that is the change here. The main big difference is now our combat capability has gone up dramatically. And also we now have way more spell options as well, so I think with Branding Smite, if we just have a look here, cast at the 2nd level, which you have to by default, you're going to be getting a 1d6 plus 17, so that's the +10 from our Sharpshooter, plus an extra 2d6 Radiant. This is pretty dang strong. In fact, if this doesn't make me hostile to you... Oh, another cool feature of... Wait, what's this? Oh no! They're using the War God's Blessing feature to let me hit them. Okay. Yeah, so 23 plus 5 radiant damage. That's not bad for kind of Act 2 damage. Especially considering we haven't actually taken ability score improvement yet, so this is still the base stats of our build. Pretty dang nice. Yeah, that did a lot. Ooh. Okay, let's continue with the level ups. So next up at total level 9, we are going to be a Bard level 3, and you guys know me at this point, we're going College of Swords. I have to say I now have I've started making videos, I now have a love-hate relationship with this class. So the problem I have now is College of Swords is so damn good that people in my comment section recommend it for everything, even if it has nothing to do with the actual build itself. They recommend it for everything. And I can see why, especially on ranged builds, because we're getting the blade flourishes here. We get our slashing flourishes, our defensive flourishes, and our mobile flourishes. All working with our ranged attacks. They're adding an extra d6 of slashing. I can either push targets and let us teleport to them, attack up to 2 enemies at once, so a multi-attack for free. This is probably the best one for this build. And the defensive flourish giving us a bump to our armor class for free. All it costs is our bardic inspiration die, which we're going to have a decent chunk of because we're going the rest of our levels in bard. You can't go wrong with College of Swords. Unless you're making like a skill monkey build and you want to go College of Law, I honestly think College of Swords could be one of the strongest subclasses in the game, up there with like Open Hand Monk and a couple of others. This is such a good subclass. As for our spells, we now get access to level 2. Take whatever you like here. Take something with utility. Probably nothing that takes concentration, because again, Branding Smite is going to stop that. So something like maybe something that works outside of combat, like Knock or Invisibility works really well. See Invisibility can also be really nice. Although if you're using Branding Smite, that will kind of be slightly redundant. But, you know, do whatever you like. Shatter is a good ranged option if you're not quite sure what else to do. Detect Thoughts. I'm going to take Invisibility here because I like the idea of maybe being able to start combat stealthed out because of Invisibility and getting like a surprise attack. I think that could work. As for your fighting style, I mean, obviously, like I say, if you didn't take this earlier as Paladin and you wanted like a sidearm kind of damage thing, you can take Dueling here. Or if you decide to change off of bows to dual crossbows, 2-weapon fighting is really good here, allowing you to add your ability modifier to the offhand crossbow. It's a pick your favorite situation. Since again I'm focusing on doing a ranged build, I'm going to go with 2-weapon fighting, simply because I feel like it is realistic to want to maybe pivot into dual crossbows, as I do feel like that does more damage overall, especially with Sharpshooter. So yeah. Next up, at Total Bard level 4, we're going to be getting our final feat of the build, and it's entirely up to you whatever you want to take here. If you want to take a feat of some kind, maybe tough, maybe, I don't know, mobile, athlete, you can do a bunch of different things here. I'm just going to go for a flat ability score improvement because we haven't actually buffed our ability scores at all this build, which is a bit of a hefty blow. But definitely bumping up your dexterity and constitution here is a good move. We don't need our charisma as much, but we definitely want our dex and con to be a bit higher, so this is going to give us a buff to our ranged weapon attacks and a buff to our HP. Pretty nice overall. We're also going to get an extra cantrip at this level. Take whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Mage Hand has a ton of utility, so that would be my pick. Again, as for spells, I would just take something utility-based. I would maybe Knock or Detect Thoughts. Honestly, it's entirely up to you. So, yeah. At Bard level 5, we're going to be getting our Font of Inspiration, allowing us to recover our Bardic Inspiration on a long or short rest, which means we're going to be able to use our Flourishes more often. Our Bardic Inspiration improves to a D8, always nice. We're getting level 4 spell slots now, which is going to be the highest our Branding Smite can go. And we're also going to be getting a new spell at this level. We get access to level 3 spells now. Take whichever you like. Again, it doesn't really matter. There's obviously a ton of things you could do. Again, I would try to avoid the concentration spells, but unfortunately that is pretty much all of them. So they're not going to be as useful if you're going to be doing what I would do. But I actually quite like Glyph of Warding here. You get to create a bunch of different traps with the various effects. I wish I could remember off the top of my head what these glyphs actually do. Maybe we can check that out in a minute. But I feel like since it doesn't require concentration, and it kind of gives the idea of like you're setting up a trap and then ambushing your enemy with ranged attacks, I think it actually works out pretty nicely here thematically. So I would take Glyph of Warding here. And it's probably the only time I'd ever recommend it. And our final level is Bard 6. We do get a kind of wasted extra attack here. We already got this from Paladin, so this is kind of doing nothing for us here. But if it took us till level 12 to get extra attack, then I think I've probably failed as a build maker. And our HP does break the 100 point here because of our bump to Constitution, which is nice. We get an extra spell here. Nothing new. Take whatever you like. Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I don't know. It's a pick your favorite type deal. And with that, the build is now at max level, so we have a ton of options for us here. Basically, a ton of utility spells, a ton of ranged attack options, healing, buffs. But here we go. Our Branding Smite now goes to our our level 4 slot here, and unfortunately this is where I have to report a bug to Larian. So, if you take a look at our level 2 branding smites, same as before, an extra 2d6, but we're getting up to 36 damage now, which is nice. Moving on from that, our branding smite ranged cast at level 3 does 3d6 damage, taking our damage up to a highest potential point of 42. Pretty good overall for a bow. But then we get to level 4, and it goes back down to 2d6. I don't know if this is just a visual bug in the menu that doesn't affect gameplay, but unfortunately this means we are heavily nerfed at this point. This build will be much more powerful once Larian fixes this buff, and I will be reporting this to them as a bug report, because I am that kind of annoying bastard. But obviously, if we were to get an extra d6 of damage, that's going to take our damage up way higher, and actually make this pretty viable as a ranged bow attack that we will be mainly spending our spell slots on here. But other than that, we also obviously get our weapon flourishes, which are really nice. These are going to do a ton of extra damage and give us a bunch of utility, like I already stated. But yeah, let's move on to the equipment now. Now, obviously I'm showing this off a level 12 just because it fits nicely into the kind of flow of the video, but you can get all of the equipment I've shown here pretty much at the start of Act 3 if you just know where to go. So, definitely, and without fighting any bosses, let me make that clear. I'm pretty sure all of these can be got without fighting bosses except for the bow, which doesn't really matter because this bow will still carry you well up to the point where you would get this anyway. So, let's look into the build. First of all, we're going to be replacing our headpiece with the Mask of Soul Perception. Nothing too crazy here. It is just going to give us a +2 bonus to our attack rolls as opposed to the +1, and this is to all attack rolls, not just ranged. But we're also getting it to initiative rolls and perception checks. So overall, if you don't know what to put on a build, this is basically one of the best things you can do, other than maybe like the Helm of Baldur. You also get Detect Thoughts for free as well. This is one of the coolest kind of just generic headpieces in the game. We're also going to be getting the Flame Enameled Armor here. This is going to be... it's going to be less AC overall than the Dwarven Splint Mail, but we do get some nice benefits. A +2 bonus to initiative rolls. As a ranged attacker, always being able to make sure you go early in the combat initiative is really good. Endurance by Fire, you have resistance to fire damage, which we kind of already have, so... and a +2 bonus to saving throws. Now that's the kicker. Also, you get to cast Fire Shield, which I quite like here. It's a non-concentration... extra buff to your defenses, and you also get to retaliate if anybody gets within melee range, so you're not entirely helpless if an enemy does manage to close in on you. Obviously, there's other sorts of armor you can use here that might be overall more powerful, but this is kind of what I liked for this build. You could even stick with the Dwarven Splint Mail if you want that buff to Constitution, or just the general higher armor class. We're also going to be taking the Helldusk Gloves here. Now, I think the main thing people think was whenever I suggest the Helldusk set, they think that you have to fight Raphael, which is the game's super boss, to get these. You don't. The only piece of the Helldusk armor you get from beating Raphael is the chest piece. All of the other pieces of the Helldusk Helldusk armor set can be obtained by entering the House of Hope without fighting anybody, and then you just leave again afterwards. There's basically anything except the equipment that you have to get from fighting Raphael or the other boss, I believe his name is Harleep, you can get without fighting anybody. So the House of Hope, if you get into it early through Act 3 by pickpocketing the cleric who has all the items you need to make the portal, you can get all of this really overpowered stuff basically right at the start of Act 3 without having to do anything else, in case you didn't know. But basically what this is going to do is it's going to give us a bonus to our spell attack rolls and spell save DC. I think that might help with Branding Smite on the spell save side, but it's not really a big deal. But we now get to imbue our arrows with an additional bit of fire damage. So, with that, we are doing an extra couple of d6 of radiant damage at least, with an extra 1d6 of fire damage. It's just overall really good. You also get the Raise of Fire cantrip, which is basically just a big ass version of Scorching Ray that's cast at a high level. Just a nice little bit of extra kit. And lastly, the bow, the Gaunter Mail. As I've said in my previous builds, this bow and the Darkfire short bow are kind of interchangeable, but when you're using it as your main weapon, this is definitely the one you want to have at the end. Yes, it does require having to be a pretty powerful boss to get it, but once you get it, you've got it. It's good. On a hit, you possibly inflict Guiding Bolt, which I believe is what is able to give you advantage on the next attack roll. So basically, you're constantly giving yourself advantage, or have the chance to do so, on each hit with this, which basically will counteract Sharpshooter in its own way, despite the fact that we've gone out of our way to kind of mitigate it as well. Because between the archery fighting style and the Mask of Soul Perception, that's a +4 to hit, which means because of Sharpshooter, you're only taking a -1 penalty as opposed to a -5, which, if you're getting advantages in multiple different ways, it basically makes Sharpshooter free. We also get Mail Glowing. The object shines with a glowing light of 6 meters. Sure. I think this is toggleable. Yes, it is. So you can turn that off. A +3 enchantment on it. This is the highest you can get on the bow. And Celestial Haste. A 5-turn version of Haste with no downsides. The only issue is concentration, so you're not going to be able to use this at the same time as Branding Smite. However, I do feel like you can get in a lot of burst damage with your extra attacks and haste before needing to rely on Branding Smite. So it's kind of a 2-mode playstyle. So let's equip it. So with that, let's look at our Branding Smite damage now. With unfortunately, a level 3 spell slot is the highest we can go at the moment because of the bug, but otherwise this would be 4d6 radiant damage. We can do 3d6 radiant plus 1d6 fire plus 1d8 plus 17 piercing. And because of this, we have an 80% chance to hit, even with Sharpshooters all in effect. So let's fire a bow and see what happens. 4 fire damage, 23 physical damage, and what was that, 12 radiant damage? Let me just see. Yeah. That is a big chunk of damage on one of your two attacks you get per turn. Pretty cool. Oh, and you also get Bolt of Celestial Light with the Gontril Mail, which just does all that shit you see on your screen right now. So, yeah, I mean... And that's not taking into account things like the Flourishes as well, because those don't require your concentration. So maybe say, for example, if you've buffed up with Hunter's Mark. Let's cast that. And then we go for a Slashing Flourish, which means we get to do 2 hits. Yeah, that's a lot of damage. I've also killed this person. Better go get them up. So this is why I feel like, as compared to the Cleric build, this is definitely the more powerful option. I think overall, play the Cleric variant if you want to be a support role, or you want a character to be a support role. Play the Paladin version if you want to be a big-time damage dealer. So I'm going to kind of go over the pros and cons of this Paladin build. The pros, a lot of ranged damage. Also being able to do different damage types as well on your ranged strengths is really good for overcoming resistances. A lot of utility spells. There's going to be very few things you can't do in terms of controlling the battlefield, such as giving yourself or your allies advantage, extra damage, misty stepping around the map, using your flourishes to do other things. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. And overall, your high AC, your high chances to hit, you just have a lot going on here. But as for the cons, if I was to get a decent greatsword on this build, the bow, and maybe go for like great weapon fighting with the two-handed fighting style and all that, with the power that regular Divine Smites give you, you'd feel underpowered in a fight. For example, if I just grab my NPC's longsword and pop it on my current character, let's have a look here. So we have a -1 to hit with this, right? And a -1 to our damage. We're getting our 1d6 fire. Let's look at Divine Smite. Cast at level 4. It's a 6 to 55 damage. That, even on a -1, basic longsword is eclipsing our bow damage. And that is a shame. That's why I think, unless you really want to play this like Arcane Archer archetype with the holy bow and all that, you're kind of losing out if you're trying to be a main fighter. I feel like if you want to use this Holy Arrow build and actually have it be more effective in a party as a support role, I would go with the Cleric version, because I feel like you're going to get more out of that. As a support character, basically, maybe, like I say, take Shadowheart, slap a level fighter on her, go the rest of the way, Cleric and whatever your persuasion is, and just let her be the support with really powerful bow options. Don't get me wrong, this build is strong enough, and it's such a really cool theme that you won't have any trouble if you use this build. At the end of the day, you are still mostly a paladin that can do decent damage with the bows that we've provided. So you're not going to exactly be struggling, you're just not going to be as powerful as, say, a more optimized build or a melee-focused paladin. So, and I think this is the point of my builds. I'm not always trying to power build. I'm trying to give you the most interesting and powerful option for a thematic build. And some people in the comments have pointed this out, like, you know, being able to have fun and like play a certain character is more fun than actually just being supremely overpowered. And then you get people who will come into, let's say, a build where I'm making an Eldritch Knight and tell me to play Battlemaster. But I'm building an Eldritch Knight. Why are you telling me to play Battlemaster? And that's not what this build is. At all. I digress. But I believe that's it for the build. I will get into a few more things here kind of as we go. Because the main, like, this video has also been a bit different, because obviously my last couple of videos I tried to make a shorter format, and then in my last video I kind of asked, hey, do you prefer this format of video or my originals? And the general consensus was to do a mix of the two, have slightly more long form videos, but actually take into account all the aspects of play, which is why I've shown equipment at Act 1, 2, and 3, and kind of shown where you would be at each level. And I think this style of video is one that I'm most happy to make. I don't mind putting in a little bit of extra work to figure out a kind of game plan as you go throughout the game, and also coming up with builds that work better as a whole and not just as a final level. Because again, with this build, you're still strong because you're playing a fighter paladin until you go into the bard levels, and that's still strong anyway. So you're not losing anything with this build. Just the fact that if you're limiting yourself to bows, you're going to be doing slightly less damage than you could do. So, yeah, overall, I think that's going to be it for me. My next video, I've got a couple of build requests lined up, but I've got a really, really cool idea for a build that I want to try out, based around a certain status condition. And I think you guys are going to find that one quite interesting. But please, give me your feedback on this video. Like, do we like this new style? Do we not like it? Do you prefer the style that I used in my last video, or the style that I've gone with from the start? Let's see where we go with this. I'm going to keep experimenting for now. So, yeah, I hope to see you all next time. Peace out.